everyone, good afternoon. I hope you all are having a fantastic day so far. My name is Emmy Hens. I am an account manager with Flat Earth Networking, and on behalf of our entire team, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. We are truly grateful that you guys have taken the time to be here with us today, and we are excited to spend this time with you to learn, connect, and of course enjoy some delicious food. So before we kick things off, I'm going to go over the agenda for today. So first, I'm going to give a really quick rundown of Flat Earth for those of you who may not be familiar. And then I'm going to introduce our esteemed guest speaker who has so graciously agreed to share their expertise with us today. And then we're going to jump into the presentation, and after that, that will be followed directly by a Q&A session. Your questions are absolutely vital, so please remember them, jot them down, and we will make sure to address them at the end. And then, of course, enjoy your food throughout the session. All right, so Flat Earth, for those of you who may not be familiar, just going to give a little bit of a rundown about who we are and what we do. So we are a local cybersecurity consultancy. What sets us apart is our commitment to work with your business and understand your business's specific needs, and also to work with your existing cybersecurity or your existing technology team in order to fill any gaps that might be in your cybersecurity program. All right, and on to the main event. We have got Dr. Morgan Sachs here with us today. They are a cybersecurity analyst at Flat Earth, but prior to that, they earned their PhD at the Institute of Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. They have presented their research at international conferences on 5 different continents, and they are excited to be here with us today to explain a little bit about quantum computing as it relates to cybersecurity. So with that, if you guys could help join with me in giving Morgan a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Amy. Well, that means I don't have to justify my being here, so I really appreciate you giving me some street cred. Yeah, so I'd really like to talk to you about cybersecurity and quantum information. This really joins what I'm doing now with what I did in a former life. So my PhD was in physics with a specific background in quantum information, quantum science, quantum computing. So what I'd like to do today is start out talking a little bit about what is quantum, and then move on towards, what are the current technologies, and then trying not to spend too much time there, because what I'd really like to talk about is how it's relevant to us in this room today. So we're going to talk about cryptography and cybersecurity, and what the impact of quantum computing could be on our modern IT infrastructure, and how we could mitigate any potential issues that could come up. So what I'd really like to focus on is maybe some action items or some concrete ways of looking at what's going on now to protect ourselves in the coming age. I'm going to warn you, this next slide is the mathiest slide in my presentation, and it's not particularly mathy, it's just got some pretty diagrams on it. And by pretty diagrams, I mean they're not pretty at all, so please forgive me. But what I want to tell you about is the difference between classical and quantum computation. So classically, we use bits, zeros and ones. You can just think of this as some little system that's either on or off, high or low. Sometimes we say true or false. But it's just 2 discrete possibilities. We can kind of think of that here as just this one point on the circle, that's our on, and one point is off. In the quantum realm, there's a bit more structure than that. We have more possibilities. People like to say you can have a 1 or a 0 or anything in between, but it's even further than that. We can have 1 or 0 and anything else on this circle. So just to give you a picture visualization, and this is even a bit of a destructured. There's not as much information here as in an actual qubit, but there's a continuum of states. There's an infinite combination. So qubits is what we call these. Quantum bits is what a quantum computer uses, and they live on a circle. But that's not the only difference. There's 2 other differences I wanted to bring to your attention, which is you can't clone them. If you try to clone a quantum state, Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And there's no universal operation that will take any quantum state and output 2 copies of it. Which is kind of funny because in classical computing, we copy things all the time. We upload things to Dropbox. We make a copy of our presentations and send them to colleagues before we give them. You can't do that in quantum theory. And that's the basis of quantum secure algorithms that we will talk a little bit about later. And in addition to no cloning, there is this thing that happens when you measure a state. So when you ask a quantum state, hey, are you 1 or are you 0 or are you somewhere in between, the only output options are 1 or 0. So there's a collapse that happens. And this collapse is part of that same algorithm that can guarantee security. If we want to talk about cybersecurity and quantum, we have to talk a little bit about cryptography. So there are 2 main types of encryption. And encryption is what makes the internet work. If we want to send banking information, if we want to say hello to someone and not broadcast it to the world, if we want to write a diary that we host on Google Drive and no one find out that information, we have to encrypt it while it's in transit, while it's at rest. And there's 2 ways to encrypt. You can use symmetric keys and asymmetric keys. Symmetric keys are, imagine it's the 1940s, there's a war going on, and you've got the codes for encrypting these secure war messages. You take them in a briefcase and you go across the ocean with your codes, and then you deliver them. And these codes, I have a copy of the codes, you have a copy of these codes. And I use the same code to decrypt as to encrypt that information. But I had to send someone across the ocean. Because otherwise, there has to be a courier. There has to be a secret way of sharing these codes ahead of time. And you have to trust the person who sends them, and you have to make sure that they're not intercepted. And that's difficult. It's costly. So symmetric encryption requires some sort of method to share keys ahead of time. So in walks asymmetric encryption, which is what we know as public key encryption, where you broadcast to the world, hey, I've got this public key, you can encrypt anything with it, and if you send it to me, I can decrypt it, but only I can decrypt it because I keep my private key private. So asymmetric encryption is what makes the internet secure. And oftentimes, asymmetric encryption is what is used as a precursor to then share a key to do symmetric encryption. So how is this related to quantum computing? We'll get there, but first I want to talk to you a little bit about the specifics of how a asymmetric encryption works, how a protocol works. So the idea is based on the fact of the existence of what's called a trapdoor function. This is some operation that when you perform the operation, it's relatively easy, but if you want to invert that, it's very difficult. Easy to fall in the trapdoor, hard to get out. Really good example of this is that it's really easy to multiply 2 very large numbers. Most of us will have, at some point in our life, learned and committed to memory an algorithm that does it relatively quickly. Multiplying 2 4-digit numbers by hand, we can write that out and do it on a single piece of paper, right? Turns out it's actually really difficult to invert that. If you're given one very large number and told that it is the product of 2 other large numbers, it's very difficult to figure out what those 2 large numbers are. So this is a trapdoor function. This is actually, in particular, a trapdoor function that is the basis of the security of RSA encryption. Prime factorization is difficult to do. There's another trapdoor function called the discrete log problem, and that's the basis of one of the types of Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So asymmetric encryption relies on the fact that when you try to invert one of these problems, it's not impossible, but it is very, very difficult, which means it's not provably secure, it's just practically secure. If it's going to take 1,000 years for a computer to undo what you encrypted, it is, for all practical purposes, secure. But then enters quantum computers. How is this connected to quantum computers? Well, if you had a quantum computer with enough qubits, then it could break RSA in less than a day. And RSA is a very commonly used encryption protocol. It's a very, it's the TLS and SSL are based on RSA currently. So Shor's factoring algorithm can break RSA, and Shor's algorithm for discrete logs, both of which are quantum algorithms, can break, well, Shor's algorithm for discrete logs can break Diffie-Hellman. There's also, I added this extra little tidbit here, which is there's another algorithm that is well known in the quantum computing community, known as Grover's search algorithm. And it is one of the reasons for the recent increase in the AES key length. It was 128 for a very long time. Now it's 256, so we increased by a power of 2. And the reason for that is that's all you need to do to make that particular hash function quantum secure. These two, however, no such luck for such a simple fix. So RSA 2048 is what is being referred to right here. And we might need as many as 20 million noisy qubits to break RSA, and 5,000 if they're perfect. And we're definitely in that noisy regime right now. So the most advanced quantum computers are in the low thousands of noisy qubits. So the takeaway from this is that if an adversary were to make a quantum computer that was sufficiently large, sufficiently advanced, the currently used encryption protocols on the internet today would no longer be secure. And that's a problem. That's a really big problem. But there are solutions to this problem, and many of which are already being implemented today. The first one is, let's add some quantum infrastructure and do quantum key exchange. Quantum key exchange relies on those two principles I told you about previously. That's no cloning and the collapse of the wave function, that measurement issue. It's called the measurement problem, but it's not always a problem. And it's provably secure. There are dozens of these quantum key distribution networks that have been set up throughout the world as proofs of principle. There's one in DC for a while. There's one in Tokyo for a while. But the state of the art still has a huge trade-off between distance and the rate of key generation. So if you want to have a distance of 1,000 kilometers, which is the highest that we can currently do, your rate of key distribution goes significantly down, maybe unusably low. But the biggest drawback here, in my opinion, is that quantum key distribution requires new infrastructure. You can do the you can create the communication channel on classical infrastructure, so you can just use fiber optic cables, but on either end of that cable you need new hardware. So it requires retooling hardware. Solution 2, which is much more advanced and much more readily applicable to today, is to replace RSA, to replace Diffie-Hellman, to create a new trapdoor function that is also hard for quantum computers. Turns out there's a class of problems that are difficult for both classical and quantum computers called lattice problems. And the main advantage for switching the encryption algorithms and the key encapsulation methods that we use is that you don't need new physical infrastructure. There are some exceptions to that, like if you have RSA keys burned into your computers or your devices. But for the most part, everything's just the same physical infrastructure. Since 2015, the National Institute for Standards and Technology has been working to build a standard for post-quantum cryptography. So this is any sort of encryption method that is going to be robust against the creation of a crypto-relevant quantum computer. So 2015 was the first call for submissions. There were several rounds of for looking at the different submissions, and just a few weeks ago, 3 new final post-quantum cryptography standards were introduced. So this is not the first set of post-quantum crypto standards, back as far as 2022, there were, so this personal identity verification of federal employees and contractors, I don't believe is post-quantum crypto, but I think these two are. But what's interesting about these is we've got a key encapsulation mechanism. So this is essentially a way to, I had this slide earlier with the guy with the briefcase. That key encapsulation mechanism is the guy with the briefcase. You're using a quantum secure way of transmitting a key that you can then know with confidence is shared privately, but only between you and the person you wish to have the key. And then the digital signature standard is a way of verifying that you're talking to who you think you're talking to. So these are well worth looking into in terms of security of organizations moving forward. Of course, these are just federal recommendations. This is recommendations for the federal government. So it's the Federal Information Protection Standard is what the FIPS stands for here. So we've talked a little bit about there being a problem, and we've talked a little bit about the solution. And I'd like to talk about timelines. There is this kind of inclination of, well, quantum computers don't exist yet, so I don't need to worry about this yet. And let's be honest, we all have a lot to worry about in our day-to-day. We need to worry about ransomware threats that are happening right now. So do I really need to spend time worrying on harvest now, decrypt later attacks? Which is what your current data could potentially be affected by. So the idea here is there are some groups who do harvest data that is passing through the internet, and they just store it for a time where a new vulnerability in an encryption scheme is discovered or new hardware is developed that enables breaking that encryption. Harvest now, decrypt later attacks are relevant to quantum computing, but that is not the only regime in which they might be applied. Any new technology could be part of that decrypt later. So you have to ask yourself, how long does your data need to stay secure? And that depends on your sector. Do you have health data? Do you have top secret government information? Or do you have credit card data? Or is it just a list of cool trees you saw on a walk in the park today? Depending on the answer, it might be a day, it might be years, it might be decades. If your answer is decades, then you need to start thinking earlier about making a transition to post-quantum crypto. The next time length that you need to think about is, if I need to retool my IT infrastructure, how long is that going to take? Is that I click a button and it's done tomorrow? Or is that I need to work on education throughout my organization, I need to work on data inventory, I need to do asset management, and I need to actually go through and make sure that the people that I'm interfacing with are also compatible with these new standards. So that might take a few weeks, that might take a decade. It really depends on what systems you're changing. So the last time frame that no one knows the answer to is how long until quantum computers are cryptographically relevant. I've heard some people say 2025. I think that is optimistic. But 2030 is, another maybe more conservative estimate. But maybe it's going to be 20 years. But if you need to keep your data safe for a decade, and it's going to take you a decade to retool your IT systems, then even if a quantum computer takes 20 years, you need to start thinking now about what that retooling looks like. So when we start talking about retooling and being post-quantum safe, there's a few sort of higher level things to start thinking about. The first one is data inventory, which is, where is your data? Where is your most secure data? And how are you protecting it currently? If your most secure data is highly segmented on your network and it never leaves that segment, and you're already using post-quantum crypto on it, or you're using only one-time pads, or secure keys that are not using any asymmetric encryption, then maybe you're significantly ahead of the curve. So you start asking questions about what your organization looks like, and then you start making policy about what you would like your organization to look like. What is your risk tolerance? How long do you want to keep your data safe? Questions like these need to be answered in order for you to become agile in a cyber environment. So there's this concept called crypto agile. And crypto agile just means if a cryptographic standard changes, you are poised to make that change quickly. Part of this is knowing where everything is and how it's currently encrypted. And so one of the really nice things about this list here is these are just good cyber governance. These steps aren't just going to make you resilient to quantum attacks. They make you resilient to all attacks. They make you more agile if you're doing incident response because you've already done your asset inventory. So the main takeaway is do good cybersecurity governance, and you're going to be way ahead of the curve in terms of post-quantum security. I have a few references up here, and then 2 recommendations, which I'd be happy to pass along. These are lectures provided or given last year at the annual conference on privacy, security, and trust by the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity. At the University of New Brunswick, and they're both really good talks. This one up here is more about cyber governance, and this one down here is more about the technologies and encryption standards. So I do tend to talk way faster when I actually give a live presentation, so hopefully we have plenty of time for a Q&A, and I would gladly take questions now.
You talked about the harvest first, people who, the idea to be taking the data right now and then later on, using it for ransom. So is this something that is known to exist? Like there's, groups that have already said, hey, this is what we're targeting and this is what we're doing?
My understanding is there's indirect evidence,
okay.
But I don't know of any direct evidence. I don't know of a group. Well, I do know of groups who are doing this in that people will ransom encrypted data.
Right.
And if they're ransoming your encrypted data, they can just keep it.
That's true.
So.
Okay.
And to repeat that question, I was supposed to repeat that question. Do we know for sure that there are people doing harvest now, encrypt later schemes? The answer is indirectly, yes. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you.
So I have a question from on the live stream. Do quantum computers actually exist today? If they do, approximately how many are there and where are they?
Yeah, they do exist, and they exist all over. It depends on your definition of a quantum computer, right? Is a calculator a computer? Technically, yes, but it's very small. And so if we count the number of handheld calculators as classical computers in the world, then there is orders of magnitude more computers in the world than if we only count personal laptops and desktops. So some quantum computers are what's called not Turing complete, which means they're really good at certain tasks. So to sort of repeat this question, because I forgot to repeat it again, is do quantum computers exist today? And how many are they and where are they at? So do they exist? Yes. How many are there? Hundreds, thousands. Where do they exist? A lot of universities. Commercially available ones, there's D-Wave, IBM, and Google. D-Wave was as far back as like the early 2010s. It had up to thousands of qubits, but it was not the type of quantum computer that can break Shor's algorithm. It was not good at that kind of, it can't do any kind of computation. It was a very special beast. The IBM quantum computers, so D-Waves existed, I think there were like dozens of them. They were often at universities or like large tech firms. Then the more research-based quantum computers are going to be at predominantly in countries and at universities that have a lot of funding for these sorts of things, predominantly the United States, China, Canada, and like allied countries, in terms of scientific collaboration. So I think that answers the question pretty well, as they range in size and they're all over the world, but none of them are big enough to do Shor's algorithm well yet.
To kind of piggyback on that a little bit, there is a general collaboration amongst all these places that have these systems to try to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, so the question is there a general collaboration across these different organizations and government entities? And the answer is there is, yes, there's collaboration, and yes, there is competition. Every country wants to be first, but also it's kind of difficult to stop scientific collaboration with the way that our world currently works. But it is easier between certain countries. Yeah, so it works like academia works, is collaboration and competition, yeah. More questions?
Yes. What is the role that AI plays in designing or using quantum computing? And when does it get to the point where it is designing itself?
That's a good question. So what role does AI play in quantum computing in terms of design and R&D? And then at what point are we designing, is a quantum computer designing itself? So this is a quantum computing question, but also an AI question. I have very little expertise in AI, so I will not delve too far in that direction. I don't want to talk about the technological singularity too much, unless someone wants to grab me after lunch and talk about science and futurism. I'm happy to. But the more practical question here of how does AI interface with quantum computing is actually really cool, because there's relatively recent research that was used, it implemented AI techniques to increase the fault tolerance of quantum computers. So fault tolerance is this concept of how many errors can your quantum computer have before it just doesn't work anymore? Or how many errors can your quantum computer have for you to not have to spend more than a certain amount of extra computational cycles fixing those errors. And there was some relatively recent research that used AI techniques to make that trade-off a little more favorable. Yeah. Happy to take more questions if there are any.
Looking at it from the other way, how might something like this benefit us with respect to AI and cyber defense?
Yeah, that's such a good question. How can this actually benefit us? I tried not to, but the intersection of quantum computers and cybersecurity often ends up in this sort of scare tactic realm, and I do apologize for being like, there's this big threat, and not telling you what's great about quantum computers, because I think they're really cool. Quantum computers are really good at optimizing things. So think logistics, think medicine and pharmaceuticals. Anything where you have a lot of options and you need to get a best option in some sort of landscape, quantum computers tend to be really good at. And they're also really good at searching things, searching across large state spaces. So any realm where discovering something faster is going to be helpful, which is a lot of realms, quantum computers have the potential to be advantageous.
So would we assume that the providers of security solutions would be using something like this in tandem to combat that which is going to be, so it could be this battle of technologies that are similar?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, will cybersecurity analysts, will IT people be using quantum technologies on the defensive as well? So yes, I think a really good example of that is in a future where quantum technologies are much more prevalent in our ecosystems, where we're actually using quantum key distribution. So that was, I mentioned two solutions to the problem of breaking RSA. One of them was just change your current crypto standards but stay classical. The other one was use quantum key distribution. One of the really cool things about quantum key distribution is if someone is eavesdropping, you know, and you just discard that information. So you use quantum key distribution to share a private key, or pardon me, to share a symmetric key, and symmetric encryption is provably secure instead of just difficult to crack. So quantum key distribution, you can share a key, do some math to figure out if someone was eavesdropping, and if they were eavesdropping, discard that key and start again. Yeah. So that's one way. Another way is anything that can be used by an adversary can be used by us to, just think about red teaming, right? Like anything that can be used by an adversary can be used by us to take a look at the landscape, see what our exposures are, and then fix them. Yeah. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? All right, sounds like we're just about questioned out for now. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Before we wrap up, I just want to thank everybody so much for being here in person and on the live stream. I want you all to know that our door is always open, so if you have any more questions or if you'd like to connect, we would love to hear from you. But I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.